Living with Your Mother, Haydenosaunee Ecological Understandings. In this webinar, which is the second one of a series that we're doing, we're going to explore what is our relationship to the nature. My name is Rick Hill. I work at Mohawak-ism, the Indigenous Knowledge Center at Six Nations Polytechnic. In our first webinar, we talked about the creation story and about how important the original extended family was to us. The Mother Earth, the Grandmother Moon, the Brother Sun, and the Grandfather Thunders and the Winds. We're connected to all of these things. Our creation story made the living universe a part of our family. So we have to look at what is our place in this cultural landscape. How do we understand place, the concept of place? How does oral tradition articulate place? How does the spirit of place manifest itself? How does it affect us? Where do we see it? And how does place affect our identity or derive from that? You know, all of our nations are named after a landform. It's an important connection to that place. We're also told to be thankful. When you think about it, it's kind of a roadmap to our relationship to nature. The people, the earth, the water, the fish, the medicines, the strawberry plant, all of the foods, the crops that we grow, the animals, the deer, birds, the eagle, all of the trees, particularly the maple tree. And we go on and on. Everything from what's on the earth up into the sky to way on beyond the sky. It's all interconnected. So to understand our ecological knowledge just means you have to look at what is the interdependency of all of these things. Make no mistake about it, our ancestors had a big impact on the environment. We actually created quite a carbon footprint because we're burning wood all of the time, cutting down trees and creating fertile fields for crops. So this is a Mohawk village in the Mohawk Valley, probably around the 1500s. So we can see several longhouses, which were all made out of timbers and bark, could house maybe up to 1,200 people. I think the largest village that I know of at one time was about 5,000 people in central New York among the Senecas. So that's a lot of people. It's a lot of wood to burn, a lot of animals to harvest, a lot of crops to grow. So we definitely had an impact. The difference would be it was a sustainable impact because this village wouldn't last forever. We'd occupy that for maybe 20, 25 years. Then we'd move on to another location. We're moving about on the landscape, letting the land regenerate itself. There'd be more firewood, the more deer would come back, the ground would be more fertile to grow corn in the future. We may come back maybe 75 years and reoccupy the same village. The Haydenosaunee exists within an annual cycle of ceremonies. To give thanks, we acknowledge all of those things that are important to us. So every month there's something going on that connects us back to that cycle of nature. When we follow the cycle of nature, we look at nature to be our teacher. But things do change. At one time, there used to be these passenger pigeons that would come to our territory. They say twice a year, in the spring and the fall. They say there were so many of them that the sky would get dark. It'd be like they would be like a cloud that would last for days. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them would come to visit. And then, of course, we would feast on them. They were a great thing. Well, these were hunted to distinction in the early 20th century. They just don't exist anymore. So that's an experience that our ancestors had that we'll never know what it's like. Plus the loss of whatever nutritional value these birds have provided for us is also gone. Behind Niagara Falls is a cave. They say that's the home of the thunderbeans. They existed behind there. The thunderbeans have a job to keep the waters fresh with their lightning, purify the air, and chase these serpents away. Well, there's a story about a young woman who actually had some trouble one time, some mysterious trouble, and she became like a poison to her own people. She couldn't understand it. So she decided to commit suicide and went over Niagara Falls. While behind her, these thunderbeans knew what was going on. They grabbed her, rescued her, and brought her forward and said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of this." They performed this medicine, and you can barely see this little snake that actually fell out of her. They said it was the snake that was causing pestilence on the land. So the thunderbeans, their favorite meal is snake, so they ate it, and they brought some peace and sanity back to the world. So there's this relationship between us and the landscape and all of the creatures of it, but it also depends on these spiritual forces. So as the thunderbeans go about doing their job to chase these serpents away, to keep the waters pure, to keep the land free, the serpent becomes a symbol of all of that can cause harm to human life. You think about famine. Think about pestilence, bugs coming, eating up your garden. You think about water becoming dangerous to drink, poison. That to us is symbolized by this underwater panther. By keeping it underground, we hopefully make life continue. So we have a philosophy that the land has a spiritual power. The earth is alive and has this power of regeneration. That's very important to understand. That humans are made from the clay of the earth, so we're intimately connected to this thing we call our mother. as well as all of the plants, animals, and trees become connected to the same way. When you think about it, soil is nothing more than the decayed remains of everything that lived here before, including our ancestors. Their bodies refuel the earth, become the flesh of our Mother Earth that then produces new life. And all forms of life have a living spirit. They were breathed into them. There's something about them. It's a spiritual essence, and that's what makes indigenous cultures distinctive. We believe that animals, trees, rocks, water, clouds will all have some kind of spiritual power. And each of us were given these original instructions, including all of the animals and the birds, and everybody has their function to perform. And when everybody does well, when all the beings do what they're supposed to do, life is quite beautiful. But when you don't, things get out of whack. In the creation story, we talked about this battle between the good-minded creator and his brother Flint. They both brought some aspects to the creation. The creator is trying to make beautiful things, plants, to medicine plants, foods, animals that would help us out. His brother tried to pervert it all. His brother created ice. In fact, some people believe his name means flint, or flint-covered, or ice, anything that will bring harm to humans. So there's a story that Old Man Winter is like this warrior who walks around in the woods, ice warrior. He lives in this icy palace, and he carries this ice war club, and when he cracks it against the trees, you hear this sharp crack. If you've ever been in the woods in the middle of winter, you know what I'm talking about. You hear these trees crack. Hopefully to knock the branches down on humans is the goal of this winter spirit. But every spring, a young handsome warrior comes along, the spirit of spring, carrying a jar of berry juice. And he chases this Old Man Winter around, eventually throws the juice on him, melts his icy demeanor, and spring comes again. So in many ways, winter is the time in which Flint perceived that everything in the world would die. Everything would come to an end. So to us, by doing our ceremonies and having a relationship with the sun and the moon and the stars and all of the other things, we allow spring to come back and life to continue. John Mohawk once said, "There's a mystery about the universe, a plan that brought us and made all of this coherent, the intelligence that created everything." We want to think about that. We want to extend greetings and thanksgiving to what we call the great creator. So be it in our minds. So this intelligence that he's talking about, that the creation has a real rational reason why it exists and how it works. Our job as humans is to come in harmony with that intelligence, that we can follow the path of our ancestors to do the things that we've been asked to do. One of them is to understand that nature is like this dish, this great dish with one spoon. And out of there comes all of the bounty which we're meant to share. There's an ecological premise to the dish. First of all, that everybody has an equal share to what's inside the dish, but you only take what you need. So you don't hoard food, you don't collect things and store them. I think I'm just going to keep this for myself. Second is you always leave something in a dish for other people. You go to pick a medicine plant, you don't take the first one or the second one, you don't clean out the whole field. You always leave something there because plants have intelligence. They're looking at what we do. And the third thing is you got to keep the dish clean. Now, with the environmental holocaust that we're facing today, it can be very challenging because we can't do it alone. But it's this notion of sharing and connecting that we have to get back to. So this great sacred gamble that was played during the time of creation was really betting on who would receive the seeds of life. If the grandmother had won that game against the creator, she might have hoarded all of those seeds and said, that's it, they're bringing it to an end. But because the creator defeated his grandmother, he got all of the seeds, and then he allowed life to continue in this world. So we can see it, the design in this dish here in the four quarters, the four different animals, because sometimes the clans play against one another, sometimes it's the women playing against the men when they play this game. But this idea that life is meant to continue, but it is a gamble, it is a risk because of what Flint brought to the universe. This is a wampum belt of the dish with one spoon. It came about at the time of the formation of the Great Law. What the peacemaker said is that the chief should eat from this common dish. We should never use a sharp instrument because we all have an equal right to that. What he's really saying is that we should share the land, that when it comes time to hunt, you have to go where you got to go, you get what you have to get. What he said was that we're going to share the land and that everybody has an equal right to go hunting and gathering in all parts of the land. It isn't as if only Mohawks can hunt in Mohawk land, but it's one land meant to be shared. So the dish with one spoon becomes an important symbol because he also said we should eat this meal of beaver tail. And that's what the white rectangle in the middle of this wampum belt represents. that beaver tail is a nutritious food and it's supposed to be helpful to our people. So the peacemaker said in sharing this common dish, beaver tail stew, that it would help to keep our chiefs' minds clear, would help make them strong. Well, it turns out there's great nutritional value in beaver tail, but I can guarantee you that's a pretty rare meal among the Haudenosaunee, so it makes you wonder if we're not following part of our original instructions. Maybe this is one reason why our health has gone so crazy, that we've gotten so far away from this dish and so far away from these foods that we've become a danger to ourselves. Oren Lyons said this: there can never be a world peace as long as you make war against Mother Earth. To make war against Mother Earth is to destroy and to corrupt, to kill, to poison. When we do that, we will not have peace. The first peace comes with your mother, Mother Earth. Well, that's very important because there is such terror going on against the Earth. As we know, a number of species have disappeared. There's constantly digging and tearing and chopping going on all over the place that makes you wonder that what is our mother thinking about us? Have we maintained our relationship with her? And even among the Haudenosaunee, sometimes our practice can become a little questionable. In 1700s, some of our chiefs were speaking to the English, and they said, "We plant a tree of peace and open a path for all people. Our hunting place is to be one, and to boil in one kettle, eat from one dish, and with one spoon, and so be one." So this shows this philosophy has been not only shared among our people, but we also believed in sharing it with the newcomers. We said if we're going to live in peace, we first have to plant this tree of peace, meaning that we have to agree that we're not going to cause harm to one another, and then we can enjoy this bountiful land, but we have to share our hunting rights. So this is why even today, when our treaty negotiations, we say we have a right to hunt in this land. Well, it's really we have a responsibility to hunt, to take from the land what's necessary, but the idea in the end is to share it all. This is a dish copied after one made by Joseph Brant. So we can see the original 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee. We can see the beaver tail in the middle. What he's really saying is, follow the dish with me as I come to Grand River. Over there, we'll be able to enjoy the life that our ancestors had. We'll be able to harvest things from nature. We'll live in bounty. And that was his vision for this land called 6 Nations Along the Grand. But something happened along the way. You had this great tradition of the dish with one spoon. This other wampum belt shows it, and you can barely see it. It's actually a beaver design in there, but the belt's been cut in half. We had a treaty with the Hurons and with the Algonquins and Anishinaabeg people about sharing this land, but the fur trade brought something strange. It brought greed, it brought guns, it brought alcohol, it brought money, it brought a lust for manufactured goods. And that lust nearly destroyed the beaver in our territory. So we kind of betrayed our original instructions. We betrayed the plan that the Creator had for us, and we've suffered the consequences ever since then. This Seneca carved spoon is kind of funny. It's kind of ironic. Now we see this guy sitting there eating from this dish with one spoon as his little dog sits there waiting for some crumbs to drop on the floor. In many ways, I feel this is what we've become like as a people. We think as a result of our treaty relationship that the Canadian government or the British government or the American government is supposed to take care of us, supposed to feed us, supposed to teach us, supposed to mend us. We've forgotten that we were born a free and independent people with responsibilities back to nature. And maybe if we fulfill those responsibilities, we won't have to depend on commodity foods. And things did begin to change. 1753, one of our chiefs talking to George Washington, who was a soldier in the British military at the time. You in former days set a silver basin before us. So instead of the dish, they gave us this silver basin. And you put a leg of beaver in it, desired that all nations should come and eat in peace and plenty, and not to be churlish with one another, not to try to cause harm to one another. And that if any such person should be found to be a disturber, I here lay down at the edge of the dish a rod which you could use to punish them. Well, all of a sudden, the dish becomes the fort, the trading post. That's where we go to get our supplies. And what did they say? You have to now protect the dish. I'm going to give you these weapons to use against other people who are coming to take from your dish. So colonization brought this competition for resources to our people and often caused some serious harm. We had a lot of wars going on between us and the Anishinaabeg, the Hurons, over that beaver trade. One of the most insidious parts of the trade, of course, was alcohol and rum. These 2 carvings, which are, I think, are Wyandot, Huron, show a man this panther is giving him a gift. Now, if we know about the symbolism of the panther being this underground, underwater creature, it's a dubious gift. And that we see him sucking on this cake because alcohol really took over our people in the 17th, 18th century. In many ways, it's still problematic. And that's what helped pervert our minds. So it's gotten us away from the power of nature and get caught in the power of colonization. This is the Three Sisters, the painting by Dawn Darkmountain. So we see that the Creator had a great plan for us. He laid this thing out. If you just connect to this, you do these things, you'll be able to sustain this life that I've entrusted to you. But because of colonization, we kind of got far from that. But the Three Sisters themselves become a model for our behavior. Learn to get along. So these three plants, corn, beans, and squash, grow together in a mound representing the earth. You put the corn in the middle. Its tall stalks provide a framework for the pole beans to climb and grow. And the beans put nitrogen in the soil, which the corn needs to grow. Around the mound grow squash, and pumpkins, and melons, and their big broad leaves help to keep the weeds down, help to keep the ground moist. So these three sisters literally helping each other grow well. So you could say that we had our own earth science. We had our own understanding of how the earth worked. We understand the mechanics and the chemistry of it. Our ancestors studied the earth and the cycles of nature to learn how we should live in harmony with her. Keen observation is very important to our ancestors. You have to understand how things work. Maybe you don't understand everything, but observing it, you see and you understand this is the way it goes. And then you have to think about that. There's thoughtful contemplation of the meaning of these natural events. What does winter mean when it comes? What does it mean when ice comes all over the place? What does it mean when these plants sprout again in the spring? And so we're re-experiencing the cycles of nature because you're living on the land. If you live just in a department store, the grocery store, you will not understand the way nature works. We also then heard stories of similar experiences, our ancestors, the creation story, how things got to be the way they were, the origin of the chestnut tree, the maple tree, the pine tree. All of this stuff is the context of appreciating what nature provides. And then we also have an ability to modify our thinking to changing circumstances. Maybe this is why we've been able to survive to this day. We don't live like our ancestors did, but we still carry some of that memory, some of those traditions, some of those expressions, some of those ways in which nature understands that we still appreciate what it provides for us. Just as we were made from clay of the earth, we're able to transform what you could call mud or clay into useful objects. And making these things, think about that. You're taking something from nature and through human intervention, crafting it to come to this useful product like this pot here. There's 4 figures on the top of the pot that represent the 4 directions, the 4 different winds, and the 4 beings who look after us. So the pot itself symbolizes our relationship to nature. Most of the designs of our ancestors used were also mimic nature. We would watch the plants as they grow, like the fern as it unfolds, or beans as they sprout, and that becomes an inspiration for the art that we would make. It's not like you can interpret every element in every piece of art, but there's this stylistic tradition, things growing, things expanding, talking about corn and plants and the earth, and all of that energy, you could say, that we were given, all gets manifested in the art that we do. Our culture has a great respect for trees. We look at humans almost like trees because, we sprout out of the earth, we grow tall, and then eventually we fall over and go back to the earth. The tree of peace at the time of the Confederation is very important to us, the ever-growing tree, a pine tree, a white pine that provides shelter and protection. And at one time they say that tree was actually one of these young dancers who was rising up into the sky. He fell down to the earth and went into the ground, and the next season was born as a white pine. So we're connected to these trees, connected to these stories in such a way that we realize that all of the trees are our relatives. We also look to nature as a model of how we're supposed to behave. The clan animals, like the heron clan, they look at that, and the herons are nesting birds. When you think about it, they're home builders, and they raise their family in such, and so that gives us an idea about how we should be. We look to the beaver, who was the original village builder. When you think about it, a beaver can stop the course of a creek overnight and create a safe place in which to build their homes and to raise their young. So the beavers, as the village builders, are also a model for us of making a safe home. All of the clan animals have this story and connection. So if you remember the deer clan or the wolf or the bear, you observe nature and it teaches you something about your extended family. But it teaches you also, we need all of this. We need turtles and deer and bear and beavers and herons, all of them to do their part. As a result of that thing, we also realize that we should not be wasteful. We try to use everything, try to get a second or third or fourth use out of everything. The jawbone from a deer helps to scrape the corn off a cob, or the toes of the deer help to make a beautiful sounding rattle that you wrap around your knees when you're dancing. So nothing is wasted because it's our way of being thankful to nature. When you start to waste, you lose respect for what it is that produced the material to begin with. Take something like a porcupine, with its sharp little quills. Now, it doesn't shoot its quills like people believe, but when it gets angry or nervous or upset, it raises its hair and these quills come out. Well, our ancestors took those quills and they were able to dye them and shape them into beautiful ways of decorating their clothing, like this pouch here came from the Mohawk Valley in the 1700s. I don't know how it happened, how they discovered it, but that was the native in creativity at work. Taking something from nature and reformatting it. We look at the designs on the pouch, so we see the thunderbird or the eagle representing the world above. We see the turtle representing this world where we live. Because we're keen observers of nature, we also then organize our ceremonies according to the seasons and where the stars position themselves. And at the beginning of our year, the midwinter ceremonies, we have these two men who go around house to house. And they're wearing fur robes to represent the hunt. They have corn husks wrapped around them, corn husks braided together, represent the bounty of the fields. They carry these corn pounders as they go to renew the fire in every home. Now, we believe that's necessary if you want to enjoy the harvest later, as we see in the woman standing in the cornfield. You know, in 1799, they said our corn stalks were 15 feet tall. An ear of corn was 24 inches long. That's huge amount of nutrition from every field. We still farm, we still plant those same seeds, we still continue the tradition, certainly not as extensive as it used to be. In 1684, they found over 1 million bushels of corn at one Seneca village site called Onondaga near Victor, New York. 1 million bushels of corn. Imagine what that would be like. So today, when we braid the corn after it dries in the field, it becomes our food that sustains us, not only used in our ceremonies, but it's the fuel of our lives. More and more people are returning to planting because for a while it just got too convenient to go to the grocery store. But now we know that food is laden with all kinds of chemicals and problems. And this way you maintain your relationship with the food that you eat. So it's very important for the Haydenosaunee to return our children back to the cornfield, back to the garden. That's the original schoolhouse for them. And learn by observing and learn by participating. So it's a very important process that was given to us in order to continue our life as Haydenosaunee people. Especially today when we know that food is laden with all kinds of chemicals and pesticides, and with the genetic engineering going on, you never can trust what comes out of the bag or the box or the can. But when you grow your food yourself, or you collect it, or you harvest it, or you work with people that you trust, you're also getting that spiritual energy that was attached to the original food. It's not just about the mechanics and the nutrition. It's also about your relationship to the food. So in the tradition of the dish with one spoon, it's very important for us to maintain a relationship to the plants and animals. In this particular case, these beans. These hard beans are very important to our health. They have slow-releasing carbs. Today's food often is the source of a lot of our health problems. In this dish that was provided for us by the Creator is a long-term health plan. Attached to that, though, as we see in this photograph, a couple picking sacred tobacco to be used in our ceremonies, there is this spiritual connection, this spiritual obligation that we have, this spiritual duty, you could say, to give thanks and to do the ceremonies. So you're blessing the field, you're doing all kinds of things to try to ensure that the crops go good. In the old days, you could go in the woods and the fields, you could gather all kinds of foods and plants and medicine. In this case here, these oyster mushrooms that grow usually on a tree that's fallen over on the side of where it's moist. But you know, this plant here is very important because if you eat that, it helps to reduce your cholesterol. I can guarantee you cholesterol problems are really hurting our people today. A lot of people start taking a pill right away to offset that. Well, this was nature's cure for cholesterol. Or the essential oils that are necessary to maintain your health. In this case, we used to get them from nuts. And you crack open the nuts, you see it's very hard to dig out the nutrition of them. You boil it up, but it provides that oil. So you walk around in our community today in the fall, unfortunately, you're going to see all kinds of nuts that have fallen from the tree just laying on the ground. People aren't using them, depending on them. In the old days, we used to decide where we were going to locate our village by the number of nut trees nearby. But now we're in a new world. Scientists are beginning to play with our foods, beginning to genetically modify that which the creation had provided for us. The new compounds had entered our food system, and now they're in our bodies. And things that never existed in our ancestors now are inside us and our children. Nearly everything that is alive now has chemicals in it that never used to be. And what we drink, eat, and breathe is different than it used to be. It's dramatically altered how we experience the world. It's clouded our thinking, made our brain kind of fuzzy. It's hurt our heart. It endangers our health. So we have to think about that. How do we restore this relationship? But sometimes you see these huge earthworks. This is the Serpent Mound in Ohio. It's a huge place. We don't know for sure why the ancient people created these symbols, these earth forms. Some of them are burial mounds and some of them aren't. Some of them are just huge. But today a new kind of landform is taking place. This is the tar sands out west. Look what it's doing to the landscape. It's a different kind of serpent. Or is it the same kind we talked about, this thing that's coming to destroy life on Earth? The bond is breaking between the young and the natural world. A growing body of research links our mental, physical, and spiritual health directly to our association with nature. Reducing that deficit, healing the broken bond, is in our self-interest. So this author coined this phrase, I think, nature deficit disorder, that more and more and more time is spent in front of a computer, on a cell phone. The kids don't go in the fields anymore. They're not fishing, they're not hunting, they're not gathering, they're not being outside. And it's beginning to hurt us collectively. So if our identity of Haydenosaunee is tied to our relationship to the earth, you have to wonder, what kind of people are we becoming? This is the ancient village of Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, Missouri. It was a huge village, over 30,000 people. It probably existed for maybe 900 years. Something happened to it, though. It began to change. They don't know whether it was internal problems. Was it too many people? Was it sanitation issues? Was it famine? Whatever, it began to change it. The same thing's going on today with our landscape. This is a landfill. They're all over the place. They're like the modern mound builders, replacing what our ancestors did. But now these landfills become a source of danger because they leak. They're causing problems because they're toxic problems. We really have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do with all of the garbage that we create? We can't just bury it. We just can't send it away. We can't pretend. The only thing we can do is try to produce less garbage. We see the results of this already. Fish are becoming contaminated. The things that we used to depend ourselves upon. These are some fish from Lake Ontario that have tumors on them growing because of the chemical contamination in the water itself. So the fish are unhealthy. You know, there's a fish advisory in both in New York and Ontario that said women who want to become pregnant shouldn't eat fish. Women who are pregnant, little kids, in fact, they discourage most people. So even though we've got this great water, and you've got these big fish you see on these fishing shows being pulled from the water, they might not be healthy. So we have to think about that. How do we restore a relationship with the fish? But it becomes increasingly difficult when we're being sold a different kind of food, a different idea about food, and that our kids are becoming increasingly obese because they're just sitting around playing on a computer, on the cell phone, texting, Facebook, whatever it is. It keeps them away from those superfoods, those spiritual foods, from that enriching environment. And instead, we're having now children with an increasing rate of diabetes. At Polytechnic and in different communities around the Haudenosaunee country, we have this seed exchange where our farmers bring in the heirloom seeds, those that have been in our hands as long as we can remember, and we exchange our knowledge about them, and we help each other planting. Community planting's on the rise here at Six Nations and in other communities. More and more people are becoming concerned about the quality of foods that they eat, and this is good. We're getting back to what it used to be, where you're responsible for the food. This is nature's health plan for us. Nature only requires us to do the hard labor in producing the food, to have the spiritual thanksgiving in order to show our acknowledgement and gratitude for that. And eventually it's this partnership between the land, the sun, the moon, the stars, the rain, all of that stuff, and the seed itself to regenerate this power of life-giving food. John Mohawk also said this: our ancestors had to come up with a culture that not only enabled them to survive in this place, they had to come up with a culture that made them thrive in it. They had to come up with a culture that made them it. We are nature. Nature is our family. We're part of that. We're made from the clay of the earth. The things that we do are connected to that. But somehow we've gotten away from that, thinking that humans are superior to nature, that we can manipulate nature. And it gets back to this very intimate, thankful relationship that we will enjoy the bounty that nature provides. We just need to abide by the rules that nature has. So this is why in the old days we would raise our children on a cradle board. It has the designs of nature, the plants, the animals. Even though it was influenced by Victorian tastes, in this case we see a peacock and you can see flowers in a vase on top of a table, it's still the same idea. The earth provides this path of life that we want our children to venture forth. And on that path they learn to appreciate the medicines, the plants, the waters, the birds, the animals, all of the aspects of nature that continue. But we have to go beyond just giving a Thanksgiving address. We have to actually live that way as if that matters to us every day. It's not just about the ceremonies, it's the time between the ceremonies that matter. How are we going to coexist with nature? They tell us to look to the earth to see the faces of the coming generation. They're there in the ground, several layers of them coming up to the earth, born out of the earth, the woman's body into this place. So Oren Lyons reminds us, what about the seventh generation? Where are we taking them? What will they have? We say that the faces of the coming generations are looking up from the earth, so when you put your feet down, you should put them down very carefully, because there are generations coming one after the other. If you think in these terms, you will walk a lot more carefully and be more respectful of the earth. Well, he's still talking a little metaphorically and philosophically, that how you conduct yourself matters. What you do during the day matters, and you have to think about that. You have to think about the long term. But we also have to remember this, that when we see our people stand up and defend our rights to land, they're also defending this relationship. It's very important for our young people to get connected to their culture, to their place, to their history, to their people. Sometimes the only way that they can start doing that is by exercising a voice that says, not one more inch of land is going to be taken and abused. Not one more inch of land is going to end up some factory or industry, some place of pollution. That we're going to have to restore our relationship to the earth. It's very important that our young people realize that the future is in their hands. But it's a big fight, as we can see here. It's hard to appreciate the scale of this machine. A man standing on that just appears to be a little dot on the structure of this earth-tearing machine for digging up coal. So it's a big battle between the forces of the economy and government that says we need to dig up more coal, more oil, we need to find more and more and more and more, with the indigenous philosophy that says less, less, less. Find a way to balance these interests off in the modern era. So that concludes my talk today. Just some ideas to share with you. Hope you didn't get you too depressed, because at the same time, we see our culture is on the rise. Planting is on the rise. More and more people are learning their language. More and more people want to connect to nature in very profound ways. So I appreciate you taking the time today, and hopefully to see you at our next time, at our next webinar. Yahweh and Danitu.